Hi, and welcome to our June edition of the Cinetopia Radio Show and podcast. I'm Amanda, your host, and on this month we focus again entirely on documentaries, as our team attended this year's Sheffield Doc Fest. Both myself and show regular Clara Strachan chat about the festival, review a few documentaries together, including a new film about the band DEVO, and also the film ETERNAL YOU, which follows artificial intelligence startups that create digital avatars for loved ones following their deaths, plus many horror films we recommend from the festival. Clara also sat down with Inma de Reyes, director of The Boy and the Suit of Lights, and I chat with Duncan Cowles, director of Silent Men, two Scottish-based filmmakers whose films world premiered at DocFest this year and did exceptionally well, winning awards and being audience favorites. All on this month's show, so stay tuned. So Cinetopia has one last event in Edinburgh this summer before we take a little bit of a break, and that is our June Cinetopia Networking Night, and that's Wednesday, the 26th of June from 7 to 10 p.m. It's going to be at the Blackbird Bar and Restaurant in the Courtyard area, pending good weather, and I'm not going to jinx anything to make any predictions at this moment, but the weather has been nice the past couple days. So please come along and connect with fellow film industry folks over drinks or an informal chat. And whether you're a seasoned pro or just starting out, our networking nights are all about building connections and community in the local film industry. So we hope you will stop by. All right, and welcome to our June edition of the Cinetopia Radio Show and podcast. I'm here with Clara Strachan, regular. Clara, how are you doing?
I'm feeling fine. I'm feeling good. I'm excited. Sheffield Documentary Film Festival are always my favourite episodes, I think.
Yeah, I think it was my favorite episode last year too. And that and IDFA, we love talking about documentaries, and we try to get it in as much as possible. But we get to, spend a lot of time talking about a bunch of films, all different kinds of films, and also have two wonderful interviews with some filmmakers who had their first feature, but also are local to Edinburgh and Scotland. So this is going to be a really great show. So overall, Clara, you watched Sheffield from afar. You were part of the Sheffield Doc Fest from afar. I went to Sheffield again. Last year it was incredibly warm, like super warm, and this year it was just rainy and cold. I actually caught a cold in Sheffield while I was there, but it doesn't disappoint. Like, I think you really need to come in person next year because it's really one of my favorite festivals, to be honest. I think the city is really fun and friendly, but the festival is really nice. Like, there's so much going on at the once that me and another colleague was saying, like, I feel like the one thing about festivals is that you always have FOMO, like a perpetual FOMO, because you feel like you're missing out on something that you could be doing.
I mean, tell me about it. I wasn't even there, so
but like when you're there and you're like, I would like to this film, then you can't, because you have to go to another film and you just never can get it all done, which is why it's really useful to have the doc player and you can catch all the stuff later.
It's so true.
But overall, like the cinemas and the theaters and everything about Sheffield, they really have just a wonderful sort of ecosystem of space, and I also love seeing that they sell my tote bags in the showroom cinema. So
feels good.
Yeah, that's a little extra bonus.
You've made it. Cinetopia's broken through Adrian's wall.
Well, in Sheffield, I've made it, but I've yet to see that anywhere else. And he hasn't bought any recently, but still, I'm very it's a little added Cinetopia bonus, the logo in the lobby. But yes, so we're gonna talk a bunch of films. We're gonna review together a couple films, and then go through some films that we saw separately, and sort of recommendations that we think, and maybe if they come out in the future on streaming or in the UK, which I hope they all will. Well, not all of them, but most of them. So anyway, we'll be talking about Devo and Eternal You together. And then Clara interviewed Inma, who directed The Boy in the Suit of Lights, and I interviewed Duncan Cowles, who directed Silent Men. And they're both Screen Scotland Scotland-based filmmakers. I believe they were both funded by Screen Scotland as well, which we love to see. All right, so let's start with Devo. Obviously, this film was about the band Devo. Well, and also I heard them say DEVO a couple of times, which I thought was...
I've been trying that out in my day-to-day life. Not that there was ever much call for me to reference DEVO beforehand, but I've since been listening to them a little bit more. Yeah, I can't make DEVO fly in my mind or my heart, I'm afraid.
No, I don't think I'll ever get... I don't think I'll ever be... But I will try it out too, because it is all based on this devolution.
Yeah,
so...
but I thought, so Devo, the name is based on, the concept of devolution, which is super edgy term, satirical, kind of judging mankind. Not that I disagree with them. But yeah, so I kept saying evolution to myself, trying to figure out the pronunciation. But yeah, okay. So Devo, with any documentary like this, I kind of feel like I have deja vu when I do any kind of documentary about the music world, or that is very sort of like that comprises of a lot of archival footage. And it feels you feel like you've seen it time and time again. However, I did actually really like this film.
Yeah,
I really enjoyed it. I was sort of aware of Devo's music, as many people are, just by whether they like it or not, or they were willing participants or not. People know Devo's music. Whip It being one that people probably know. But I didn't know anything about their background really, or the motivations behind their sort of their hijinks and their aesthetic. So I was quite involved, and it's very, very timely. A very timely film, I feel, because the inception of Devo as a band came about, or at least the political roots of Devo took hold in the early 1970s, in 1974, I think. I really hope I'm not getting this wrong. But in 1974, there was the Kent State massacre, where students were set upon by the police who are trying to quell anti-war protests, and the understandably cynical worldview that was born of witnessing those events and witnessing the lack of change which actually came about, and the sort of apathy that society showed in the face of the crushing of these completely morally justified demonstrations, led to the creation of Devo, which is a criticism of mankind itself and the way that we are regressing back to really horrific, barbaric, animalistic roots.
Yeah,
so I like that. I thought it was timely. It felt timely, and it was comforting in a way until we get to the arc of the story. But yeah, what did you think of that?
No, I mean that same thing. So I heard somebody, Bandy Chang, who used to run BBC Storyville, talk about her new role, which is Fremantle, is sort of she commissions films, and one of them was Devo. And so that's why I was sort of curious about seeing the film. I was obsessed with Whip It when I was very young, because I was like, the thought that the music video was quite bizarre. So I had this connection to it. But I didn't really know their political sort of like leanings or backgrounds or anything. I just thought it was this bizarre 80s, band. And one of my colleagues was so obsessed with them. I think I heard so many Devo songs like in my 20s. But yeah, no, I really was fascinated by their like art sort of and like political sort of slant, and that's how they started. And particularly I'm obsessed with Dada. So the fact that like Dada was sort of their inspiration, and like this performative, like formative art. But I do think it was super fascinating is trying to mix that with like, you know, a proper pop band or, you know,
commercially successful.
Yeah, sort of thing, and trying to keep that stable within, you know, while also kind of keeping with their vision. But then I also found it was super fascinating with sort of the people that they, you know, thought about or connected with. I mean, I'm as much as I'm into Dada, I'm really into Bruce Conner, and I didn't realize Bruce Conner did one of, you know, like made a film, which then they turned kind of into a music video on MTV or something. The inspiration, the connection that they were with like the New York art scene. So I think it's like it made me really appreciate who they are. I mean, I actually think Mark Mothersbaugh is like an amazing composer, and you know, connects with all the stuff he's done since then. So I probably was interested in that, just in the case that I think I really respect his work there. But yeah, I think it's a really, it's not an innovative like documentary about, you know, a famous band. It's talking head sort of thing, but I thought it was a good enough story to tell, and like you said, quite timely right now. You know, and
for many reasons, but not just for the linkages to, you know, the state of unrest and a sort of disgust and sadness at the state of the world. Apart from that, it raises a lot of interesting questions conceptually, you know, about art, about creation, about rebellion, about I don't want to say punk, but you know, the punk attitude, I suppose, and the creative element of punk. True punk, I would argue, as opposed to more sort of like throwing beer bottles in the faces of people and calling that revolutionary kind of punk attitude. But it's so, for example, the band members talk about how when Devo came about, they were dealing with the notion or working on the understanding that rebellion was obsolete and that you should go for high concept art as a means to participate in society in a way that feels like you're able to function, you're able to live in it, in the absurdity of it, just revel in it, and be creative. And I find their Dada roots very interesting. I love Dada. There's an they mentioned that Dada was not art. It's the start of disgust. That's a pretty famous quote from Ferns. I think Ferns said that. So they're really throwing back to the beginning of these movements with a lot of their work, and I'm quite impressed at how prolific they were and how many TV spots they had, and they have so many great one-liners. I think the film's really fantastically edited, and they pulled together. So they really make people shine and make them seem like a really slick, edgy force du jour of sort of rebellion set inside the commercial world. So the beginning, Devo was inspired, they say, by a book called Kiss My Earth, or it was at the beginning of the end. It was called by Kiss My Earth, and they keep returning to this kind of cyclical nature, saying like, oh, the beginning is the end. Like, you know, as soon as we started this commercial venture, we knew that we'd eventually entropy will take hold. We will be commercial shills by the end of it. That is we're entering into that with open eyes, clear minds. You know, we're accepting of that. But it still feels a little bit cheeky at the end when they arrive at their all of their careers and sort of more corporate jobs and advertising specifically. I find that kind of interesting. It seems to ring a little bit hollow, but it is then, regardless of that, the whole film itself does feel like a succinct package and a satisfying package. You know, it delivered, and Devo delivered what they said they would deliver.
Yeah, well, I think for the time that they were, on, you know, they didn't give. I mean, I'll talk about a couple other music documentaries that I saw that I feel like did a little bit better at not, you know, sort of giving over to the corporate or whatever. But they did sort of. I mean, I think the fact that they were experimenting with stuff and were allowed to do that for a period of time until their record label was just like, you're not for us. Like finally is
a good run.
Was really interesting, and it, you know, and it makes me sort of appreciate their work a lot more. So
yeah, I did find it really inspiring because they were so prolific and they were absolutely tireless in their efforts at production and trying new things and being creative, and seeing that all laid out in quick succession is really inspiring, actually.
Yeah.
And I really enjoyed looking at their process and about and seeing how they rose to prominence and rose to fame and what they did to go about doing it, and how sort of that they use these guerrilla tactics and these kind of yeah, just attention grabbing performance art things, and just the little details of the things they did, like having like, wasn't it like the barcode on one of their first records like was the same amount as like a tampon price in like a store, and it confused people who are running tills or whatnot, and it's just fun little moments. Yeah, and looking at the DIY aspect of everything and them making their videos, producing their videos, and like the thought behind that, and seeing how they pulled everything together. It's just very satisfying. I thought it was very enjoyable.
Yeah, so that's Devo, and it will probably be out in some sort of streaming service at some point, I would imagine, because it's been produced by a pretty high-profile company. So check it out. And I was just going to mention a couple, because I don't think you saw them, Clara, but a couple other films that I saw that were along the music genre. And one was another band I didn't know the history of and actually didn't know anything about, but was the Cimarrons. So they were like UK's main reggae band.
I love them.
And I was particularly drawn to going to this film because Don Letts was doing the Q&A. And
so, oh my God. So when I was going through the calendar, being jealous that I wasn't actually there, I was like, oh my God, Don Letts is having a warehouse rave and I'm not going. I was so good.
So it met all my like needs just for that. So, but yeah, I mean the film, was not my favorite film, but the characters were amazing, and another amazing story to sort of see. I think the film was very sentimental because they sort of had gotten back together. Those who were still, around were able to get back together and then kind of bring other people in. But it was a really lovely show of a certain area of London, where at the time, reggae came through, or all the sort of different groups where you talk about punk and like how all these sort of music groups sort of connected with each other and how important they were, and how many other people like Bob Marley and all these people, they basically, any big reggae band or a reggae person who came to the UK, they played with, and they were all there too. So it was really special to see everyone who, again, unfortunately a few had passed away, but so it was very sentimental and lovely to learn about their history. And sometimes it's learning about a band's history and how important they were, over the decades is as much as the film needs to be. So I appreciated that film, and if you're into Cimarrons or reggae, then I think just good music, then I think checking it out, Harder Than a Rock, is a good film to check out. And the other one I would mention that I think that was the last film I saw. No, it was the second to last film. We'll talk about the last film I saw when I was there, Eternal You. But was Any Other Way, the Jackie Shane story. And that was I think it premiered originally at South by Southwest. It's a Canadian film, 2 filmmakers. But Jackie Shane was a trans blues singer, grew up in Nashville. And the story is I was very sad at the end, but like the story is really, really incredible of what she was able to accomplish like her whole life. And part of it being and also how adamant she was to staying true to what she believed in. Like she, she grew up in the racist South of America and then moved to Toronto, and was getting on to this point where she was about to be invited to the Ed Sullivan Show and sort of American Bandstand and all that, but made sure, like, there were things that they were forcing her to do that she wasn't, that she was uncomfortable with, and so just didn't end up so stood up for what for what she needed to, and then ultimately kind of just left in the 70s, just kind of fell into like no one, she disappeared, and went to live her life in California, and then became sort of reclusive at the end of her life, but then was, people refound her. But I mean, the whole story is just tragic, but also really beautiful. And I just found the way that those filmmakers told this story was really particularly, sympathetic and thoughtful, both for the family and for her, and sort of had become friends with Jackie, or I mean, sort of had these conversations. And I think the plan was to do an interview with Jackie, but she passed away sadly in 2019. But really highly recommend this film, just to learn the kind of amazing work, the amazing singer that she was, but also, it really takes you back through, that history of music as well. So all these different types of music we like in different eras, I think were captured in these different films. And there was Eno too, which I didn't get to see, but that was another film that was so there was a huge program based on films around music and musicians, which I think they regularly do, but I think this one was, I think there were some really good films in that strand. Together, we also saw Eternal You. So I guess we'll talk a little bit about that. And I was curious about that because, I just wanted to see the AI film, like what was this?
Zeitgeist. It must be done.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about let's tell the audience what Eternal You was about.
Yes. So Eternal You explores a relatively new market in AI, which caters to people who have lost people and a desire to keep in contact with them and keep them alive in some form. So there are services such as Project December, which its tagline is to simulate the dead, and that takes a little bit of information, a little bit of data, conversational data, inputs it into AI, and so you can have a conversation with a loved one. Or you can go further than that and synthesize their voice and then add that to the conversation and then stay connected with them. So it's assessing where we are with AI and looking at the market and how that can be kind of a runaway thing when it comes to AI and how it's really impacting people in this very niche, very specific, very interesting way.
Yeah, I thought, I cried a little bit in this film
Same.
too, actually. But
texting my boyfriend like, I love you. Like, it was emotive because this is the thing. I really wanted to watch this because we joke about saying we want to watch the AI movie, but like because I think we would maybe think it may be terrible. It could just be sort of like scaremongering, like, oh well, what if the machines? But this is a very human film in the sense that it looks more at why we want to hold on to people and how we would then fall prey to companies who are using technology such as AI, rather than looking at the more sort of like dystopian hell nightmare of like Terminator, would we say?
Yeah, I have to say though, when I came out of that, I was frightened.
Oh yeah, still spooky for sure. Oh no, yeah, I'm not like, oh well, it's all no, but like, it was spooky. It was quite harrowing in parts.
I think it was the first film where, because I think there's a lot of things like this deep fake stuff and everything that's already frightening, or just like, oh, well, then anyone has access to this kind of stuff. What's going to happen or whatever. But, that's a lot of a lot of noise. And then this is the first time that I think I saw a film about AI where I can see both sides, or not both sides, but I can see where there are real complicated conversations to have. And I think in this case, I wouldn't personally want, I don't know, but I don't know if I would want the process of trying to investigate someone who's passed away. but I've not necessarily gone through that kind of trauma, and where you also see where that could be very helpful for dealing with these sort of things, how it could quite be useful. But then when you see who created or who is creating that, and how their perception of the world is very much what is the, what's a bit of the problem, because the people who are using it are not maybe there was one case, for example, where there was a woman whose partner or boyfriend had died, and then she tried to bring it back with this Project December and was religious, but then the person who created Project December was quite not religious and was like, this isn't, I don't feel that way. And yet she was starting to have these very strange things come back to her. Like she asked where he was, and he came back and said, hell. I'm in hell. And that caused her a great deal of duress. And if you start to believe in the spiritual, and you think maybe there's this, you are actually connecting with the other side or whatnot, that could really cause a lot of a lot of problems, like for your, for your own sort of mental health. Where this person's just like, it doesn't exist, so I don't really care. Do you know what I mean? And that's kind of their problem. So then that's all sort of embedded in the creation of these things. If the founders and creators of, we also talk a lot about it, like AI being sort of has its own sort of
built-in perspectives,
and that automatically comes in who builds it, or what the majority of the internet has out there, we then get back at us, which is maybe so not interesting.
It is such an interesting documentary in the sense that it does cover all of those areas. So we meet the people who have created Project December, and we get all of their cynicism, all of their tech bro arrogance, glints of their genius, and just like absolutely just buckets of their opportunism, and their greed coming through as well, Kelsey, and then mixed in with a brilliant cross section of people who are using Project December and similar technologies for whatever reasons, for various motivations, to reach people that they once loved, that passed on, and the variety. I think the real brilliance of it lies in that variety. Because as you say, there is a woman who's a Christian, and when she starts getting responses from the AI saying that he's in hell and that he's suffering, she's questioning herself, and then she starts to question out whether she's dicing with powers, dark powers. She's not a fundamental Christian in a sort of manic sense by any means. She seems quite sound of mind and quite reasoned and thoughtful, but it does worry her, and it brings up a more philosophical question. She asks it. She wonders if she's summoned demons, or she's summoned him and she's tormenting him somehow from beyond the grave. And it does bring up philosophical questions. It's like, well, are we just continuing that suffering by having this kind of technology? And one of the commentators, one of the talking heads who's interviewed, I think she's an academic, I can't quite recall them, said that the issue isn't. The issue that we should be facing is how to lose people better, not how to hang on to them for longer, which is definitely the crux of the issue. And this kind of technology seems to be, for the people who are using it, is filling a void that the community and the religion isn't quite filling anymore in people's lives. And from that perspective, it's very interesting, because it's this quote solution has been introduced to people for a fee, and we find ourselves still lacking. We find ourselves still feeling lost, and it's just no solution for it. But it's just so fascinating to see how willing the market is to fill the gap of grief.
Also, there's this future of big. I mean, I think the thing that was quite scary for me was like the fact that like Google or Amazon or whatever has like sort of patented these things. So it's like it's coming. There's more of it to come.
They'll scrape our data. They'll scrape all of our conversations from Facebook Messenger, from WhatsApp, and then the conversation doesn't have to end if you just keep going. It is disturbing.
Yeah,
it is disturbing.
I do think, like I said, on the other side, there was this one VR of, it was a woman who lost her daughter, and that was the part that was just incredibly, heartbreaking. But revisiting the daughter, And then you see the responses, you know, because they just put this out and see the responses. It was a television program or something like that. And but her comment was, you know, you know, I don't dream of her anymore. And that in the case that had some sort of help with her loss.
I can tell she meant that in a good way or a bad way.
I don't know. I thought she meant it. I guess did I get that wrong, where I thought she did appreciate it. It was a feedback. It was my personal feedback of watching that scene that I felt like horrible. And then I felt that's probably the same way that other people who were like writing on, you know, like their response on YouTube or whatever was like, this is horrible.
This is sick. Yeah, this is ethically dubious.
Yeah, it all seems ethically wrong to me. Yeah. You know, let alone like, you know, you can say like, I'm not, I don't believe in all the like whatever, but then sometimes I'm quite superstitious. So like if I was sort of writing into something and it was like, I'm in hell, I don't know what I would believe.
I'd be like, oh yeah, I wouldn't sleep too easily that night for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so the particular case in the film that we're talking about is a mother, a Korean mother who loses her daughter, and then a team get together and help her. They create sort of an avatar of her daughter, and then give her a VR headset, and then sort of pop her in front of a green screen, in front of a camera and an audience, which includes, by the way, her other young children, and then have her meet her deceased daughter's avatar on like a sort of video game set that looks like it's like Red Dead Redemption, by the way, which is just really weird. And when she's having this intensely emotional experience with this avatar, which represents her daughter, and obviously, and then her children are crying in the audience as well, and then, you know, not necessarily in a cathartic way. And yeah, the response is resoundingly critical and negative, as it should be, and it's. I do feel a bit. It is creepy in the sense that because the mother felt haunted by her daughter's death, and you know, there's a level of responsibility that you have if you're a parent of a child who passes away. You feel like you could have done something, and yeah, this is definitely a film about grief as much as as about AI. Just to warn anyone, or to let anybody know that if that's something they're interested in, sort of mulling over more. For that, it is extremely interesting. And I think it gives a lot of good information about the debate on AI in American halls of power, at the very least. So it gives a little bit of interview content from Sam Altman, who's like known as like the father of like modern AI.
Didn't he create ChatGPT or something?
He created ChatGPT, and he's been summoned to the.
I think this is the lens of saying, here's one example of where it's going in this route, you know, like
this is one. Yeah.
I mean, you sort of, what is it, 10 years ago there was like Her, and Her was very much about building relationships with a computer, and this is like the real response, these connections, AI. And it's amazing that there's this much money being put into this, and I'm shocked, but it also is a good lens of where every single one of our lives, whether it's grief or relationships or science or our health or whatever, is now going to be affected with all these kinds of questions. And then that guy Sam, as you mentioned, really does put it out there, like, we don't know. I created it.
What have I done?
Look, like, and now I'm like, can't sleep at night.
It feels like a Pandora's box kind of situation when you think about it. And this is just another facet of AI which I didn't even consider. So thanks for giving me something else to be stressed about.
I was already like, I'm over the AI conversation. Oh wait,
no. I know. I was like, you know, I think I'm comfortable with what I know I've read for now for like the next like 6 months, and it's like, oh god. It's just why can't it just? I'm a Luddite in the historical sense, not like the pejorative sense, like, you know, like the mill worker sense. So I've already had my beef and my issues with AI. But this film explores a more philosophical, transcendental, spiritual, religious element of AI, and where it can take us, and like how it can impact society at large, if not just yourself on an individual level. So I find it really interesting, and just the fact that, so for example, one of the creators, I thought this was really interesting. The creators of Project December said, well, he draws a strange connection between man's medical advances, which pulled man back from the brink of death, and he sort of compares this technology to that, as if he's sort of drawing the veil between life and death, and he's right. They're a bit mystical about it. So it is. Yeah. I think it is sort of worth being aware of who these people are and the thought processes that are being that are behind a lot of these things.
On one hand, they're not spiritual or whatever. On the other, they have so much arrogance and hubris that they think they are doing, this kind of stuff. It's incredible. It really is. Like, just remember who is creating it.
Let's just be aware of of who these people are.
Yeah.
It reminds everybody, if anyone's read Clara and the Sun, this feels very close to that. So if you've ever wanted to explore the topics that come up in Clara and the Sun in a filmic documentary form, then this is for you.
Yeah, I mean, overall, I would say it's a short film. It's not that long, but it was a really interesting film. I think Dogwoof is distributing it, so it probably will be out in cinemas, but I'm sure it'll be around on television as well. And it really made us think, obviously, and talk a lot about it. So I would say, watch it if you dare. There was also quite a lot of environmental films, as you would expect at a documentary film festival. I saw Plastic People, which also, by the way, I mean, it hit me really hard with the oil machine. We showed it up in Northeast, and we've talked a lot about the oil machine, but this one was just all about plastic and our health and like how it's just in our bodies now. And I mean, I walked out of there. I mean, I knew it already, but it would like put it all right front and center, the same way that the oil machine kind of really sort of clarified how our financial system is so intrinsically involved in something like that. And obviously plastic is oil, but it was quite scary. Like, there was a woman sitting right next to me the whole time going, oh, like it's
I was at Dynamic Earth with my nephew recently, and we were learning about oil and fossils and stuff. And I was like, do you want to know something that'll freak you out? And then I told him about, like, we were in that lift, so like I was in an enclosed space with other children, and like let him know that plastic is made of fossil, like oil, therefore fossils. And he was like, oh my God. He was like, ew. So, I was like, I was like, I'll wait to tell him about microplastics when he's older a little bit, maybe, because I think I might have misstepped.
Yeah. No,
it's an interesting issue.
It was very scary. I wouldn't say it was. The Plastic People is a little bit more like investigative reporting around the world kind of thing, and so it wasn't my favorite film I saw, but it was quite interesting. And then there was Black Snow, which I thought was really fascinating. It's a film about a part of Siberia which they have these open coal mines and completely unregulated, and they're just. The coal is like burning underground, and like there's all these horrible fumes coming up. And this one woman mother had 2 daughters who have suffered from kidney disease, and basically became what they pitched it as is like the Siberian Aaron Brockovich story, and really became quite adamant bringing communities together and try to either move or clean up what's going on. And it's eventually had to leave and left, and it's kind of like doesn't live there anymore, and because there's quite a fear of her life. Really interesting character, like an amazing woman, and all the work that she has done, and very interesting story. And also it's one of those kinds of films where I, as a documentary filmmaker, would not feel comfortable making, because it was it's quite scary. I think the filmmaker wasn't allowed back in to Russia after the work that she was doing after a while for filming this. But a really interesting film. I had some sort of reservations on how they kind of prefaced the beginning. So there was like this there was this bit at the front that we thought maybe she had died. And I thought they were kind of manipulating the audience into thinking certain things that didn't eventually happen. But still, again, really interesting to learn about the coal mines in Russia and probably many other places and the effects that it has on the communities that live by them, and and what can and can't be done, or what isn't being done, or what's and how obviously massive politics at play. So fascinating film to look at as well. So I highly recommend watching that film as well. Clara, how about you? Any other good films you can recommend?
Yes, yeah, for sure. So I think one that really stood out, well, one of two that really stood out to me, although I should preface that by saying I did not get to see as many as I would like to see. But I always feel that way about Sheffield Doc Fest. It's there's a lot of brilliant stuff to see. But anyway, I would like to talk about Life on the Edge, which is a film made by a filmmaker from Greenland. It's about a lot of things with regards to society and the issues that they have in Greenland, but specifically it's about mental health and the fact that Greenland has I think one of the highest suicide rate, like per capita in the world, I think, and exploring why that is and desperately trying to fight and rail against it. And the film is about the director's personal and lived experience of that. I mean, I think they broach the fact that in Greenland, every person has somebody in their life that they've lost. Like there's no way that it's just a numbers game at that point. Like you definitely will have known someone that will have taken their own life. And the director has his own experiences. I think they run a brilliant, a chilling, clean, cool undercurrent underneath the whole film. It's about intergenerational trauma. It's about intergenerational violence, alcoholism, and it's about modernity as well, which I find really interesting and really relevant. I think it's relevant to so many societies, not least of which I think it's relevant to Scotland and to Britain. I think we're especially the male population in Scotland, Britain, are reluctant and somewhat laconic when it comes to expressing their emotions and their issues. And we have a lot of substance abuse issues and alcohol issues in Scotland. I think it's relevant, but it's just beautiful. It's chillingly beautiful, and it's just a beautiful, heart-rending film, which shows the beauty of the landscape and draws parallels between that landscape, the harshness of the landscape, and the beauty of the landscape, and the difficulties that the people face and experience, and how they live. What I find really interesting is the direct blame, the square blame that is placed on social media and the internet and a lot of the modern trappings that have come about in Greenland, which just tied in perfectly with already kernels of alcoholism which had been set in with a sort of industrialization that had arrived in Greenland. And I think it's a hard message that needs to be heard and needs to be comprehended a little bit more. That constantly being connected to each other and hanging out does not necessarily mean that you are having quality relationships and conversations and are being heard or understood. I think it's just beautiful. It's so cinematic. There are so many arcs and dramas and such brilliant studies of people. So many brilliant interviews. It never feels mawkish.
Mm-hmm.
It felt so crisp and clear and so harrowing, but also so hopeful, and so insightful at the same time.
No, it sounds fascinating, and it does. It is very resonant with the film we'll be talking about later in the show. A show with Duncan, who's a Scottish filmmaker, Silent Men. So we'll talk more about that later. But I think, it's interesting that these two films kind of parallel each other in terms of topic. And you saw Union as well?
Yes, I did see Union. So Union is a film about basically a union, an independent union formed of Amazon workers, led by a member of staff who walked out. He staged a walkout in 2020 in protest of the working conditions and also contracts, unfair firing, a lot of issues that fear people. many people in insecure contracts can empathize and sympathize with, but Amazon is just probably the worst of them and the most prolific. Anyway, yes, so this union movement was begun by this man and spread rapidly within Amazon workers. So the film details their struggle to form a strong, cohesive, and effective union that can come up against Amazon, the behemoth that is Amazon, with all their money and their lawyers and their know-how. It's a film which it can be dry in parts, and could do with a little bit more context, because a lot of it is you're seeing the extremely tiring conversations between people who are sort of just like, who are just had enough already, but then they have to go to their union meeting and argue again about the nitty-gritty of unions. And but it is a landmark achievement, the fact that the small union did actually manage to get themselves together and win a couple of victories over Amazon, and Amazon still hasn't managed to turn over a couple of the cases brought against them.
Wow.
And it's been a couple of years, so it's actually, I think it's been their case has been described as like the biggest labor union victory since the 30s, which is pretty crazy, considering that since that, so like the heyday of labor unions in America was definitely the 1950s, and actually economic inequality has risen since the 1950s in America, which shouldn't be too surprising. So I think it's a really interesting and timely, fitting film that, you know, is about Amazon, who is headed by one of the richest men in the world, who dwarfs the wealth, whose wealth dwarfs the wealth of tycoons of the 20s, 30s.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a hopeful film. It is a little bit, like as I say, it is a bit dry, but I mean, that is the water you're wading in. That is the water you're wading into. It's a sticky issue. It's a muddy issue. It's a struggle. That's why they call it class struggle for nothing. But yeah, I think it's a really important film if you want to get your head around that situation, how that came about, and sort of understand the state of unions in America and labor unions in America. I think it's a good place to start.
I mean, you've sold me on it. I would like to check that out for sure. I have to say, one of my favorite moments of the film festival was not a film, but it was based. The reason that it existed was because a film that he wrote and was part of was there, and the film was called Her Name is Moviola, and it's a film about the old way of editing, you know, like the early ways of editing, and it's really mostly Walter Murch sort of talking about just editing in general, kind of like the vision of what editing was before it was all digital, and sort of like an homage and a love of that kind of process. And he ends up taking a Mike Leigh film and recutting it, and sort of shows you how you would cut and splice something, and how hard it was, and how much time and laborious things it took, and stuff like that. But it was really fortunate that Walter Murch, who is, if people don't know, is one of the most famous Hollywood, or you know, the editors still alive today. So he did Apocalypse Now and Godfathers and whatnot, and wrote this really fantastic book. He was there to show off this film. He didn't direct it. He wrote it, and he was a part of the film, which was good. It's fun if you're into, you know, if you're into filmmaking and a film about filmmaking. It's worth a watch. It's probably one of those films that will get, you know, it's good for academic, like filmmaking courses and stuff like that for sure. But he gave a masterclass about editing, and also just sort of the kinds of editing versus like documentary editing versus, you know, narrative editing. So yeah, it was really fascinating to see Walter Murch talk about his editing process, and he's a really lovely person. But also just, yeah, these are the kind of things that Sheffield really does well. They have almost all of the films have Q&As afterwards, so it's really special to be there in person. And I have to also say, like, and I think we talked about it last year, but it's a really big industry festival for documentaries. So the vibe, because it's a smaller festival, because it's a friendly city, because it's a friendly festival, I mean, their whole mission is about welcoming people. You really do get to meet the filmmakers and get to talk to them and get to engage with them on these really important subjects that we were talking about. Like we had we saw the opening film that was co-directed by Kevin McDonald, but we also was able to talk to the other director during the open drinks and talk about the film. But just having the access, to the filmmakers to talk to them about it afterwards was really an exciting bit of that. So if you are in the UK and you do love documentaries and you feel like going to Sheffield, I would highly recommend it, because I think it's, you don't have to be this documentary filmmaker to enjoy it. It's really like it's a very friendly, special place, and there's lots of conversations and there's lots of interesting things going on. But I just want to give a big shout out that I think it's one of my favorite festivals I've been to, especially in the UK. Even if it wasn't just a documentary film festival, I think it would have it has a really special place in the fabric and the ecosystem of the UK festival system. So in the next part of this show, we're going to be interviewing two filmmakers from Edinburgh who had their world premiere of their first feature film. So to be able to get into Sheffield is a really high honor. And it's so these films were super high caliber, and it was really fortunate to that they got in, but it was really well deserved, and they both won they both won awards. So Clara, you spoke to Inma about her film, so tell us a little bit about the film, and then we'll come back and hear the interview.
Yeah, so I also saw The Boy in the Suit of Lights, as you say, directed by Inma de Reyes, which also won the Grand Jury Award for International First Feature at Sheffield Doc Festival last night. I really love this film. It's quite subversive in a way. It's definitely not the kind of film that you would expect from a subject about bullfighting. It's filmed over the course of 5 years, which is really a brilliant feat of filmmaking in itself, especially for a first feature, to create a cohesive documentary that follows subjects for 5 years. 5 years is just brilliant. But yeah, the film follows Borja. He's a young boy growing up in Castellon, which is where the director is from, which is a small town in Spain where the tradition of bullfighting weighs heavily on Borja's shoulders. His granddad, Matthias, pins his own unfulfilled dreams of becoming a professional bullfighter, which his father wouldn't let him go into, onto his grandchild, with the hopes that it will get the family out of poverty. So a lot of riding on this young person's shoulders. But like most underprivileged kids feeling trapped in a life with very little choices and opportunities, Borja doesn't see a future beyond his local area, beyond the orange fields, the fishing and the bullfighting and the traditions and the conservative outlook that is very pervasive in his area and in his immediate networks. I thought this was a really brilliant film. I overuse this, so I'm going to make a concerted effort to come up with a more jazzy phrase, sexy phrase next time. But this is a very beautiful film.
Yeah,
it's a very beautiful film. It is so luscious and so gorgeous, and it has the feel of Italian neorealism about it.
Yeah,
and also moments of feeling sort of like the 400 blows,
really?
the young people who are very self-possessed, but have very rich inner worlds, and who are very much, well, at least in the case of Borja, are very much not performing to the camera. They are very much existing, and Inma is very much embedded in that world, and you can tell there's a lot of stack camera shot, much day-to-day conversation. You're really embedded in the family life and the community that Borja inhabits. It really, it made me empathize with the people in the communities that are connected to bullfighting in a way that I didn't really foresee. And all in all, I'd say it's a coming-of-age film, and one that considers tradition, that considers where this generation is at, stuck betwixt modernity and independence, as they grow up into their adolescence, and also the political polemics that they're being subjected to as they attempt to respect their tradition.
Kind of a little bit. I actually saw the short film that she did before around I think the same character.
Yeah, it's the same young man called Borja, which I speak to her about. It's a very interesting process.
So when we come back, you'll be speaking to Inma about the film.
is the director of The Boy in the Suit of Lights, which recently premiered at Sheffield International Documentary Film Festival and also won the International First Feature competition, which honours the future of non-fiction film and celebrates promising new talent. First of all, I mean, I have a couple of questions for you, more about you as a director before I get into talking about the film, which I should preface this by saying that I really loved. I watched it twice. Yeah, I've seen it. Nice. I watched it twice, and the second time, I forced someone else to watch it with me because I wanted them to see it. So,
that's cool.
Yeah, I loved it. But I was thinking we could start off by going into your connection to Scotland, because I know that you studied here.
Yeah. So I moved to Scotland to study at ECA. I studied the MA in film directing. And then my tutor was Emma Davey, who's still there. And then the second year was Noe Mendel, who was the director of the Scottish Documentary Institute. And then during the masters, I had to make a short film. You all have to do a short film. So I made, under the supervision of Emma, I made To Be a Torero, which then premiered at Sheffield as well, and then was the beginning of what became later the feature film, The Boy in the Suit of Lights. So since then, I just stayed. I came to Edinburgh, loved it, loved everyone in the documentary industry, loved the industry. And then also I was told, you're going to make a feature, so better stay in Scotland.
Good reason to stay.
It worked out really well.
So is it safe to say then, like, how, I was about to say, I think you like the landscape, the filmic landscape of Scotland then, but I suppose that answers the question. But how do you like being a filmmaker in Scotland?
I think that being a documentary filmmaker in Scotland is really nice, and it feels like there's a community, and a very supportive community. It doesn't feel like we are fighting for one spot. It just feels like we all have a place, and then we support each other, and I really like that. And whenever, if you're struggling with something, you can always count on somebody who's in the documentary industry that's going to help you out, or that's going to give you some piece of advice that's going to be really helpful. So it is really nice to just know each other and support each other, I think. It's very diverse as well, I think. Could be more, but obviously.
So how did your short film To Be a Torero, which, as you say, screened at Sheffield Doc Fest in 2018, how did that come to be a feature film in this year's festival?
So because my short film premiered in Sheffield, and then Aymara from Aconite Productions in Glasgow, she had done a masterclass in the course that I was doing, in the film directing course. So then I approached her and I went, are you going to Sheffield? And then she said, yeah. And I'm like, well, I have my short film premiering there. And then, but she was, during that time, she was making Aquarela. So she had a bigger fish to deal with. Still, I kept telling her about my short film and emailing her and stuff. And then even when we were in Sheffield, I kept saying, please come to see my short film.
I love that.
I
persistence.
Really think, I was convinced that there was a feature there or something that could be done with it. And then premiered the film. And during the Q&A went really well. Like, lots of people were very complimentary of my film. So I guess that picked up the attention of another set of producers from America, Rustic Canyon. So then while I was going back to my seat, they basically stopped me and said, we think there's a feature here. We would like to see if we can produce it. And then the people from Aconite were there and then said, maybe we can chat about this. Maybe we can do a co-production. And then, we just had a series of meetings to see if it was financially viable, I guess. And whether there was a story. That was my job, obviously, to work out a story. and then decided to go ahead and start shooting. So I started pitching the film with Aymara like the year after we did the short film. So it was quite fast.
That's interesting. That's interesting. You say that you felt like you had to find the story. So how would you, since I haven't seen To Be a Torero, I would have if I could have found it. But what would you say is the difference in the story between To Be a Torero and Born True of Life?
So the difference between the short and the feature film, there are many, but I think the short film is focused on one aspect of the protagonist's life, and it is the beginning of his life story, basically. It feels now watching it back, it feels like a hint of what a coming of age story would be. Which is quite nice about a short film documentary, that you can just leave open and leave the audience thinking, well, this boy is basically growing up now somewhere in the world. So very amazing.
Yeah, it's such a different kettle of fish from extending a fiction film into a longer film, because I think you can always tell the difference in a fiction film that's been extended to be a feature, but I can imagine how this would be a completely different beast, and it's his lived experience. It's this young person's life changing, so it's so different. And the political landscape, as I'll go into talking about a little bit, is changing in that time as well.
There's so much space in a feature film to just add layers to that one short film, or to any idea. So you start adding layers. So there's the political landscape, there is a cultural landscape, there is the many generations conflicting in what they think, and there's so much that you can't say in a short film, and you have to pick which of these is most important, and like which of these do I want to say. And then in the feature you can choose more, obviously not too many that you confuse the audience, but you can develop many layers, and we did that, we achieved that, I think, and that's the kind of talk that we kept saying with the producers and I, and what can we bring that's not been done to the cinema landscape.
I really love it. I think it's really brilliant film. I mean, so to take a slight tangent before going back to the film itself, when I was researching you, sorry, that sounds always really creepy.
All right.
To say that, but I found out that you have a theatre background, and I was just curious as to how that theatre background has really informed your filmmaking and how you see your subjects, or you see your shots, for example.
Yeah, so I really loved directing theatre, and I also started by acting, and then I was more interested in like composing the stories, and because in theatre you have a space. So for me, that was the way the audience looks at a theatre is framed already, and for me that was how it was translated into film. You have that framing, and then I started to watch observational documentaries where the camera didn't move, and then things happened in life, and it was kind of that stage or window where you just looked at life that way, and it was still directed, but it's very curated. You don't just put the camera in a random place. It was very thought through. So making the film, we didn't just, like me and the cinematographer Theo, we didn't just put the camera somewhere random and then let things happen. It was looking for the next scene, and then maybe setting up however I wanted people to interact in that scene. So I feel that in that way, I was setting up a stage with the camera and being, this is where the action is going to live, and this is where things are going to happen. Like, I don't know, like Granda's going to sit on that chair, Eric's going to come out from that door, and Borja's going to be there. And then whatever happens inside of that frame, that was reality.
The bathroom scene comes to mind where Borja's little brother is interacting with the grandma. And this young guy's like tormenting his grandmother, just subjecting her to all his like whims, playing hairdresser in the bathroom. And you just watch it play out, and it's just the most glowing, hilarious, very real.
I remember.
Just was in a bathroom.
In the premiere, someone asked me how did that scene come about, because it was so hilarious. Like, people were laughing hysterically as the scene went on and on, and then I remember, I think it was one of those things that Eric, the younger brother, he was very tuned in with the film. Like, he seemed to know exactly what I was doing. Or not exactly what I was doing, but he seemed to know what I wanted out of each moment. And he brought so much to the film. He brought all these like quirkiness and like all these funny moments and all the questions. And then at that point, I think we were just chatting about something else, and he said, "I'm gonna come over. I'm gonna do my granny's hair." And I was like, "What do you mean you're gonna do?" And he's like,
"Okay."
I've been told I need to do her hair, and it was true. Like, Raquel was asking Eric, "Come on, do your granny's hair and come back." And he was like, "Right, this is my moment." I think. So we just stood at the doorway, and he just did the whole thing. It was so funny to edit it and to watch it over and over.
It's so funny. It's so funny because when you look at the subject of bullfighting, it's reviewed in Spanish papers in the art section, and it's a theatre piece in 3 parts, and I just love the pieces of drama that you find in the Boy in the Suit of Lights are just all the people's day-to-day interactions and what they're coming up against in their life, rather than having the ring be the primary theatre of action in the film. So I love that he's playing up to that and performing. And he's the younger one as well. I think maybe it has that something to do with maybe like the younger generation being a bit more like media savvy, that they can see themselves in videos and like content. And I that's so funny.
It could be. They didn't have phones or internet or anything like that, but Eric really liked pretending that he was a reporter. So every now and then he would be like, right, follow me. And I was like, okay, are you going to interview everyone? And he was like, yeah. And he would like interview someone or pretend to interview someone. And then he also wanted to be behind the camera or wear the headphones. He was very interested in the whole thing. And at one point he said that he wanted to be a photographer. Well, he said photographer, but still very similar.
Yeah. He knows what impact you may have had on his life.
Yeah, exactly.
But going back to the subject matter of the film, I'm curious as to what drew you to the subject of the trailer.
It was, so what drew me to the subject was the fact that it was my hometown that was so into, apparently it was the capital of bullfighting, and I had no idea about it. So the more I questioned the tradition, and the more I thought, how is this happening? Like, is there a school where people go to? Is there like an after school class or something? Or, it turns out that there is a public school that you can go to for free, and then there are children that are training to be bullfighters, which also I didn't know what kind of kids would go there, what were the reasons why like a family would be okay with, sending a kid to train to kill a bull. All these questions that led me to basically get to know someone who was a bullfighter, and he said there is a school of bullfighting, there's a boy there. And then I talked to his mom, and then I went visiting. I was in Spain anyway for my family, and then visited them a couple of times, and thought he's such a lovely, caring, good kid that I don't understand. Like, I couldn't understand how he was told to do that. So all I wanted to do was dig in and find out the real reasons why a family would put a child in front of a bull. And then I just saw that Borja had like the entire weight of his family on his shoulders, and it was just his grandfather and the mom living in this really poor conditions. So also the fact that I got so close to being really close to the kids, to Borja and Eric, made it really easy to continue with them, and they also loved the process of filmmaking, so it was quite fun.
I think the film is really subversive because of the boys, because of the subjects, because Borja is definitely not the kind of person you would expect to be a bullfighter or would be game to be training to become a bullfighter. I think people obviously who don't have any idea of the people and cultures that are involved in it would have certain images of the kind of bloodthirsty, really like rambunctious, really like macho testosterone show like teenagers that may be really up for doing it. But he completely subverts that. This film completely subverts that. It's so human and so humanizing and so tender, and they're such thoughtful, considerate people. I mean, one of my favorite scenes that comes to mind is so the film follows Borja as he grows up over the course of years. But so towards the end of the film, when he's entering his teenage years and his friends are starting to smoke cigarettes, they're starting to hang out with each other, and there's a party scene, and then it just cuts to Borja like sweeping up at the party. And I think that just says it all about him. He seems so
Totally.
gentle.
He's still so diligent and dedicated to, being such a good person that even like when everyone else is being a rebel, and then you have a space where you can be a rebel, you can do whatever you want, he's still sweeping the floor. It was, I was also so glad that he grew up to be such a good person as well, because you can get influenced by everyone else and the environment that you're in. If you're not, if you don't belong there, you can, pretend to belong there. But he didn't. He's just a good human.
The subject of bullfighting, I thought I was in for a lot more violence and drama and overwrought, intense drama centered around the ring or animal rights explicitly. But it's such a brilliant, tender story that kind of the film sort of reminds me of Italian neorealism films, and especially Eric, the little brother. I thought he kind of made me think of 400 Blows, to sort of the kid around. And it's just there's such great moments of pathos and humor, and it's so peaceful. And I think you're really fantastic director, because through so little speech in the first third, it's so evocative and so much is said, and you understand so much, and you begin to really empathize and understand. And you're at no point are you pushing us to understand any message or to get anything. It's brilliant.
It was really tricky, because having someone who's so quiet and such an introvert and not saying anything was the challenge. And so you start thinking with images and sound, and kind of everyone, obviously the editor helped a lot, and then music and sound and everything, to try to create a world where I wanted to create the world where Borja lived in, no my world, where he was just another human. It was kind of creating his vision, if that makes sense. Because it was also very conflicting for me to not show what I was seeing in bullfighting, but show what he was seeing, and wanting him to do well, and at the same time think, but he's not going to do well, and I don't want him to do well, because this is a different world, and then he doesn't belong there. And it was, I'm glad also everyone that worked in the film, it's a very small team, so we were quite connected in that same idea. And definitely had 400 Blows as one of the films that we watched as a reference.
Really? Oh, I only just saw on Aconite, the production company's website, that the film was filmed over 5 years, is it?
Yeah.
So that's an extremely long time. So how did you keep informed that relationship with the family, especially because I imagine there were sort of difficulties and tensions, and in the sense that you maybe had differing views, politically, or even just on bullfighting itself,
keeping in touch with them, it wasn't super easy, because they don't use phones that much, and they're not very talkative people. And also there was COVID, and I found it quite difficult to go, and like many things happened that didn't facilitate communication whenever I was not filming, but whenever I was there, it was really easy to be around them and then around me. And if there was ever a moment where they were just tired or they didn't feel like filming, they would just say, oof, can we just take the evening off, which is fine. And then we just went for an ice cream or pizza or something. So also good for us, the crew, to take breaks. But as Borja grew up, I feel like I had managed to remove any judgment I had, or any previous judgment I had around bullfighting and the people who would be involved in that world, and just be focused on the coming of age story and his relationship with his brother, then the granddad and the mom. It was very easy to just, at the beginning, everything was very overwhelming with the world of bullfighting. It was the bullfights, and then the bullfighters, and then the school, and like trying to get access to behind the scenes and everything. And then it kind of just, everyone started to just know that I was there. And it just became very easy, very just this is what we've got to do to tell the story, rather than, oh, I had an opinion on this, and now it was more, I'm just following Borja and I'm just telling his story, more like that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, so it seems bullfighting, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like bullfighting has become almost like it's sort of it's being used as a political bargaining chip by a lot of political parties to attract people on like a single issue voter audience, like votership, who are interested in hunting and bullfighting, because it's seen by conservatives as such like an ideologically important, and like it aligns so well with the conservative ideologies, basically like traditional values, an idealized version of old Spain, and something which is diametrically opposed to a lot of like modern things that maybe you disagree with. So you're saying you settled into and you became sort of a bit of furniture, and were accepted by a lot of people that you were filming. But did you ever meet with any sort of suspicion or political opposition while making this? Like, did anyone assume or fear that you would be unduly critical of them and that it was more of a polemic film?
Nobody that we were around assumed anything. No. I was also surprised by it, I guess, at the beginning, because we would just carry around a massive camera and microphones, and but no, everyone was actually quite open, surprisingly open for us to be there. And only if I'm in Spain and I try to tell someone about my film very quickly, I just cannot start with the word bullfighting, because I will create a reaction very straight away. And because bullfighting is definitely used as a political tool, so conservatives protect bullfighting, and then left doesn't. And on obviously the very far left, that would be animal rights activists. And so, well, I guess that's not political, but it would be some sort of like a green party on that side. But so yeah, if you're a conservative, you are pro bullfighting. And there is a scene in the film where all the kids are talking about the next election, and they only care which parties will protect bullfighting, but they don't seem to care what other legislation or what other ideals those parties have. So in that sense, yes, bullfighting is a political tool that will divide people in a very extreme way. Yeah, that's what I think that's the situation right now in Spain.
Yeah, but there's a really poignant line I remember from the scene I think you're talking about, where someone says, if they ban bullfighting, they're killing us. And that kind of expresses, I think, how deeply entrenched it is in the lives of people who really care about it and for whom it is a tradition that has been passed down through family. I think that captures so well. I feel like for such a divisive subject, a subject which and an art form or sport which is seen as a relic, like a barbaric relic by the vast majority of people.
Yeah.
It's just so interesting that you have that you do understand, you begin to understand it, you empathize. You're not completely brought around to the idea, but I've come away with it with a great deal more empathy for the people that are involved in it, and especially the young people growing up in the culture, in this generation, wondering where they fit in the world.
Yeah, it was a big issue for, I think, for the people that don't have a lot of opportunities and growing up. If they see one, or if the family has hope in one thing that they know, that becomes their world. That's everything. And I think lack of opportunities it's very real, and that's my hometown where I grew up, and I left when I was 21 because I wanted more. But not everyone has that privilege. Not everyone has a family that goes, yeah, sure, go abroad, or the means to do it even, or to study abroad.
I think it's a really brilliant film that shines a really important light in a lot of political and economic tensions that are playing not just in Spain but all over Europe. So I think it's a really relevant film. It's a really humorous film. It's really human. It's just brilliantly made. I think it's just so cinematic and beautifully gorgeous.
This is the best review ever.
I didn't think I was so entirely naive about Spanish culture, but I mean, for example, like when Borja is practicing for with his little brother, and his little brother has a sort of like a bull head strapped onto a wheel, and they're playing around with it. I was like, oh, because that's the opening scene from Jumanji. And I thought that was such like a big, I thought that was like a parody or like a kind of satire thing. It's like, oh, that's so funny. They're doing a modernist send up of bullfighting, and I realized that actually people do use that for training. So I've learned a lot.
Well, I don't know how many people use that. That was made by Eric as well. He just took like a bike's wheel and then used it, but it is sold, yeah.
I love it. There was me trying to read too deeply into the opening scenes of Jumanji. That'll teach me. But yeah, I think the film is really brilliant. So I'm curious to know what the future holds for the film, if it's going to be on any more festival circuits, or if it will be anywhere where our audience may be able to see it.
Yeah, we certainly hope that the film goes to other festivals after this one. Since we just had the world premiere, we have a sales agent called Sindicato Film Sales, and they are the ones who will be, sending it to festivals and approaching distributors. So we hope that it does the festival run, and then hopefully, a cinema run, and then I don't know, it'll live on forever somewhere.
Well, I highly recommend it. So if any of you out there are listening to this and get the chance to see The Boy in the Suit of Lights, do. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is going to be with Duncan Cowles, who is also a Scottish filmmaker, and he made a film called Silent Men, which really deals with why so many men like struggle to open up. And I think it's a very personal film. And I think if you've seen any work that Duncan's done before, he's often part of the story and part of and in a quite humorous way. But in this case, this is a very, very personal story, and he's trying to open up to the people that matter the most to him, which is his family. And yeah, so Clara, any other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, so I currently work for and have worked for charities that work in the realms of mental health support, among other things, and it is an issue which is fascinating from the point of view that mental health, and men's mental health especially, is something which it feels like we're talking about. It feels like people are addressing it or considering, and yet people are still struggling, and people are still dealing with the mantle of feeling like they're unable to express themselves, and they're dealing with intergenerational problem whereby they were brought up by people who were brought up by the generation previous. It takes a lot of time to broach these problems, and that is exactly what Duncan Cowles is doing. He's broaching the subject that there's still a lot of reluctance to express how we feel, and men especially culturally. I thought it was really sweet and funny, and it had really poignant moments, and makes really brilliant use of his family's archival footage and photos and stills that he's found. I think Duncan Cowles in himself is quite a likable character to be following. He's just not a very pretentious guy, so it's easier to delve into his own mind and his own personal story because of that. And yeah, he's got some really great interviews, and I think it's a very worthwhile subject.
It's a road trip movie as well, so
Yeah.
and very beautiful moments, very personal moments, very sweet moments. So when we come back, we'll be talking with Duncan Cowles about his film Silent Men. I'm here with Duncan Cowles, whose new film, Silent Men, world premiered at the Sheffield Doc Fest. Duncan, we're back in Edinburgh a week later, so you're probably feeling a little bit more relieved. How are you doing?
I'm good, yeah. I've not quite got on top of my inbox yet. It's sort of exploded a bit, yeah. But it's, but yeah, it's good. It's kind of weird to be finally, like, have people see it. It's been 7 years in the making, so I'm not sure how to feel at the moment. I feel a bit strange, actually. Yeah.
And we saw each other at Sheffield, and I saw you right before you were about to premiere your film, and I didn't know what to say because I hadn't seen it. So now I've seen it 1.5 times, only because I had to get here for the interview. But yeah, so your film is about how men struggle to open up emotionally. You make that really clear as your subject, and at first I was, how am I going to really connect with this as someone who's not a silent man, very much a not silent person. But I really found I appreciated its honesty and its look on honest sort of approach to this subject, and also felt like it resonated with me because the anxieties of putting something out there in the world. So your creative approach to that. So at first I just wanted to ask you why you wanted to make a film about this subject matter, especially because it seems very personal, and it's also something that maybe was difficult for you to talk about.
Yeah, I think in some ways I probably didn't want to make a film about it, and that's what made me kind of drag myself through the process of making a film about it, because I wanted to do something that was difficult, because I think you kind of should push yourself towards the things that you find more uncomfortable in life and creatively. So that was, so I'm still not sure if I wanted, kind of, was this the right film to make? But I suppose I've always struggled with opening up to my family, and some of my other short films touch on that. Well, they don't just touch on it, they're heavily about that at points. And I felt like it was still something that was unresolved, and I wanted to expand it and speak to people outside of my family, but also really just motivated by, I just wanted to get better at it, and making a film felt like the only way I really knew how to go about that.
Mm-hmm.
So to sort of force myself into confronting it and sharing it, and leaning into the uncomfortableness.
Yeah.
Getting comfortable with being uncomfortable.
It's a topic being discussed a lot right now. But as the process of this question that you started out with 7 years ago, has your question changed, or has the why changed?
Yeah, I mean, it's I try to take myself back to like my kind of head in sort of 2016, when I was really sort of writing ideas around what the film could be, and I suppose I imagined it being much more of a film about other people rather than me, and I thought I'd do a little intro about myself and a little outro about myself maybe, and the rest of the film would be very much other people. And throughout the process of making the film, it's become clearer and clearer that it needed to be more centered around my own sort of struggles with it, and through my experience maybe other people can then learn, and it can be bounced back on other people and they can reflect on their own situations. So I suppose that's shifted quite a bit through the process of making the film, and I still feel like it's not something I'm necessarily good at. I'm still not like a perfect fully, I'm still not great at opening up necessarily, but hopefully a lot better at it than I was when I started making the film, and that should be clear in the journey, I hope.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is this film about emotion and emotionally open up. But I mean, the one thing that's very clear about it, and some of your other work too, is how meta it is, and it's about filmmaking, and it's very much about the process of interviewing, making a film, the journey, and like I said, the sort of anxieties of putting that out there. And I have two questions on that. If you were withholding something from your parents, I was just curious what you would tell. I mean, there's an interview with your mom where you talk, this is what I'm doing, but how did you hold that back and still live with them? You know what I mean? About what the ultimate conclusion of that film was.
Yeah, I suppose it's hard without, like, it's almost, if you could witness life in my house back when I was living with my parents, you would talk about things that are immediately in front of you, like, the weather and dinner and trivial things often, like, oh, I'm going to do this today, I'm going to go do that today. But the sort of deeper or wider things weren't really discussed. So what I was making a film about would be kept inside. I think it was always like, I was always quite uncomfortable talking about what I was creating, because it usually was personal and quite difficult. And so I just would sort of withhold things. You wouldn't necessarily lie about things, but you would withhold information that was more uncomfortable to talk about. So that might also be like relationships, and even things that you're maybe doing, like, that might open up too many questions. You might get probed too much. I would just hold things back. And I've always felt very guilty about doing that, although being sort of unable to shift it. So that was kind of life in my family environment. And I think you'd have to probably get my mum here to ask if I've necessarily got better at that. But I still probably keep things quite close to my chest and don't volunteer as much as I would like to or should. But it's just kind of, it's the way I've always been, really.
So do you think they were shocked at the end, sort of the culmination of, a lot of this film was about being able to tell them that you love them?
I think they were surprised by certain elements of the film. They were worried there was going to be, like, I think, more revelations of things they didn't know about. And actually they were quite relieved that they were like, oh no, this is just sort of Duncan doing his sort of strange thing. But they weren't, I don't think they were necessarily expecting it when, I probably put them on the spot a bit in the film. But I think after that, they probably realised that would be part of the film, So when I showed it to them, they weren't, I don't think they were too shocked by how it was put together. They were just relieved that they were left smiling and not like, oh God, there's these things we don't know about our son. So, but that was tough. It was a tough thing to navigate. Yeah.
The other thing, when I say it's this meta and it's a film about filmmaking, is it does seem that the camera is oftentimes an extension of you, or that you're kind of using that as a barrier, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about that, like how filmmaking perhaps is your way of opening up or learning about yourself, or how do you find that within your own choices of what you choose to film and choose to film yourself and make you part of the story?
Yeah, filmmaking is definitely my way of sort of connecting with the world and dealing with it and even escaping it at times. So it's something that's grown. I mean, when I started making films, I was probably hiding behind the camera a lot more and using it as a barrier to kind of confront difficult things. Literally sort of hiding physically behind the sort of LCD screen and avoiding eye contact and just sort of like nervously mumbling these questions out, sort of feeling uncomfortable, but being able to do it with the camera there. Whereas if the camera wasn't there, I wouldn't have been able to do it. So that was sort of how it began. And I was capturing things, you know, in my short films. I was making films about my granddad and things like that, capturing people in my life that meant a lot to me and spending time with them in a way that, not that I wouldn't have been able to spend time with them, but sort of getting to slightly deeper places and understanding and communicating with them better through using the camera. And then as it's kind of gone on, the camera I've been able to kind of come out from behind the camera a bit more and use it much more as a way to really connect with people. Yeah. So I'm probably less hiding behind the camera now, but I'm using it much more as a sort of direct tool to have conversations and actually make friends and meet new people. And the other sort of thing with it is using it almost meditatively, like on my own. So when I'm not doing interviews or not filming with people, just going out and filming nature for myself and using it as a little form of expression, not in a meditative way, but sort of in a way that just it escapes me from the rest of the things that go on in the world, because you're focusing on trying to get like beautiful shots of like flowers or the ocean or insects. It's sort of a very therapeutic thing that just people would do it in different ways. So some people might film, some people might like paint, or some people might do other forms of artistic stuff to kind of escape from the world. And I think filmmaking is also that. So it's sort of an escapist tool, but also a way to connect with people. So there's a lot of different uses for it.
Yeah, and I particularly liked your meditative like sort of scenes, and also thought you probably have a full career if you wanted in sort of doing those calm podcast apps or whatever,
For you.
And also a quick question about, or, a YouTube series of just meditative bees or something would work quite well. You interviewed a lot of people, and I want to talk about how you chose to interview certain people, but I thought also particularly really interested, the most informative interview was with Sarah, who kind of gave the outline of why this is such an important topic in the UK specifically. And I just how did you come across sort of realizing in this film why this is such an important topic to talk about? And was Sarah kind of somebody that you knew before or sort of reached out to?
Yeah, so Sarah's a clinical psychologist who specializes in trauma, and she's the only kind of expert interview almost in the film, almost the most traditional documentary-esque interview. And I was quite reluctant at first to sort of do an expert interview, because I was like, no, this should be about lived experience and it should be like, focus on men. And I was kind of persuaded into filming her by the producer I was working with at the time, who Rebecca Day, she was retraining at the time to be a sort of clinical psychologist herself. So it was like, or psychotherapist, sorry. So she had come across Sarah and felt like she might be a useful person to speak to because she had so much experience with men. And I kind of just thought like, well, fine. Cause I didn't really know what else to film at the time. I was reaching a bit of a blockage on what to do with the film. So she kind of just set up the interview and was like, just go and do it. And I remember thinking at the time I didn't even really enjoy it, because I was like, oh, I'm not sure that was very useful. It wasn't the film I had in my head. I was very reluctant to have these kind of traditional, documentary-esque things. And so I avoided putting that in the film for quite a long time as well. It came into a much later cut when I realised that I needed to highlight the importance of the the wider topic and the statistics around men and how bad they are, because otherwise I'm taking for granted that, you know, I know these statistics in the film, but without just me listing them off at the start of the film, there's no that wider importance of like how big an issue it is around the UK and kind of other parts of the world, actually. So that's how she kind of served this actually really important purpose in the film. And some people have said, oh, they would have liked to have just listened to her for longer, that she's cut maybe a little short. But yeah, I mean, because we spoke for like 2 hours at length about blokes, and there could be, you know, you could release that whole interview. It would probably be fascinating for some people. But
well, I think the one thing that it helps do for me too is that as someone, like I said, who wouldn't doesn't have the same, I have the almost opposite experience with feelings. You know, they come out too easily. You know, and but also understanding that, you know, the partners I've had in the past, there's so much underneath that, and that our brains might be wired differently, and where maybe your experience and my experience are similar, maybe as using humor and sarcasm or something too. So I'm suppressing it, you know, or something, and maybe you're using that as a way to get through it, you know. So that's maybe where certain people who have different ways of being emotive maybe come together or use, you know. So humor is that way, but I think humor works really well in this film because it will allow audiences maybe to sort of take in a very important subject, but maybe something that we're not comfortable talking about, or we've all experienced in different ways. So I think it's really good to have that kind of humor in this, and probably why I don't know how many people have replied back to you in terms of their feedback since you showed it.
Yeah, I've had quite a lot of sort of people getting in touch about the film, and either to want to see it or who have watched it and have sort of how it's made them think about things differently, which is really nice. I mean, the greatest bit of feedback really was after the second screening. A sort of guy came out with sort of tears in his eyes and like his phone in his hand, and he was like, I'm just going to go and call my dad and tell him that I love him, because I've never done that before. And he went and did it, you know, and he came back in to the cinema with a big smile on his face. And I was just like, wow, I can't believe it's having that impact on people. Which is what I wanted, but I was sort of surprised that it was working. You know, you live with it for so long, you're like, oh, people are actually affected by this, which is great. I think the humor also is standing out to people because a lot of mental health-based films can, particularly ones that contain, you know, like themes of like suicide and depression. It's unusual for it to maybe contain humor in the way that it does. It sort of balances between that more emotional stuff, but then flipping back to humor, because we use humor to avoid kind of getting too deep sometimes or getting too emotional. So it was a deliberate choice to sort of flip between that avoidance in the film and avoiding the film, and then engaging with it and hopefully building towards a point where it's satisfying enough for an audience. And I wanted to make sure the film was accessible and wasn't off-putting. You know, when I think about watching documentaries, sometimes I'm like, oh God, like there's another one about, you know, whatever. And it's like, it's not always the most appealing thing. It's like, I'll just go and watch something easier to watch. And I wanted this to look and feel easy to watch, but also touching on something important.
Yeah, absolutely. So the people you chose to interview as well, just John and Ainsley, and I think there was another person as well. How and why did you choose these very specific cases?
Yeah, so the original plan was to canvass like the whole of the UK. You know, I had these great ambitious plans that fell apart quite quickly. So I interviewed a lot of men in the first few months of filming, all with different stories, lots of different things. And I guess I was kind of looking for some people or person who would hook me in to kind of follow over a longer period. And they all had interesting stories, but it wasn't quite right. Whereas John, when I met John, there was just something about him and our connection that I was like, okay, I'd be interested in coming back and speaking to him again. So he became this sort of almost like the backbone of the film. He's like this, there's my story, but there's also his story. And we visit him 3 times at 1.5-year intervals and watch his story change. I didn't necessarily obviously know what was going to happen to his story in his life, but I just was like, okay, whatever happens, I'm just going to follow it and see. And I think he's a good example of, I don't know, he's almost like this kind of, he says himself in the film, he's like, oh, I'm just an ordinary person. It's like he's almost like the ordinary person. I mean, he's but he's great, you know. I think a lot of people see people they know in him, people they've met, and I wanted that. Ainsley is like a friend, so Ainsley is an animator who I have known for years, and he was picked when I realised that like finding or searching for blokes wasn't necessarily working that well, and I'd reached a bit of another sticking point in the film, and he'd sent me this film about him crying and him processing emotions privately on his own by crying, and that stood out because a few people I'd met had mentioned they'd done a similar thing, but it was maybe like a film, so like when they felt like things were getting a bit much for them, they would go and watch a film and cry on their own, but not in front of other people. And Ainsley had done this sort of slightly strange thing where he'd filmed it, and that obviously works really well for a film because you've got the footage of someone doing that. And then I was like, he's a friend, so I can go and speak to him. And he was about to have a child for the first time, which also added a sort of extra interesting element with the film. So I was like, okay, I can film him before he becomes a dad and after he becomes a dad, and that'll make a nice 2 scenes. So that made sense to me for the film. I was I was hesitant at first because I was like, well, he's a friend, so I don't want people to think I'm not trying with this film and just going, oh, well, I'll just film him because he's someone I know. But I think it worked because also our conversation, I don't know, the sort of comfortableness that we both had and the willingness of him to open up. It's almost like we'd fast-tracked the contributor sourcing process because he's already someone in my life. So that was why he was chosen.
Yeah, he said one of the most, I think the thing that I resonated a lot with Marie, your wife, in the film, and sort of her ability sort of finally to be reassured, you know, and I think that was a really powerful moment. But Ainsley said this thing about watching, you know, tantrums, and I feel like that's something that really resonated with me because I don't know, I feel this great deal of pleasure watching a kid just lose it in public. And I didn't know I thought I might be the only person who feels that, like, it just, like, good on you, you know, because that's how I feel inside. I don't know. But so I really enjoyed that bit. And I did enjoy his film. And I think it was quite interesting that now a lot of people will see at least part of that film because it's part of your film. So. Yeah,
he would never have, I don't think he ever would have got round to sharing it. And I think I sort of made it slightly easier for him because I was like, okay, I'll show a bit of it in the film, not all 8 minutes of it, so it's it'd be very full on to watch all 8 minutes of it, but it's I think and he's really chuffed with the way the film, or he tells me he's really chuffed with the way the film is put together, and that thing about like watching a child take a tantrum and that kind of expression of raw, but it's a funny one because I'd never really heard it articulated as well as he did. But I had occasionally think to myself when you're in a queue for something and there's like a kid going like mad and crying, I'm thinking, yeah, we're all feeling that right now, but you're the only one saying it. Everyone just wants the baby to sort of like stop.
Yeah.
But it's like, yeah, we're kind of all feeling that right now, but no one's, if we're all doing that, God, it'd be chaos.
Yeah, no, but it's an amazing photo release that sometimes feels cathartic, if you will. It was well placed in there. You just had this premiere, so like you said, you're getting lots of different kinds of feedbacks and stuff. But is it asking you what your next film is? Because you know that this I think a film just is kind of a middle point is when it first comes out, and you're going to have a long length with this film in terms of where it goes and what it does. What do you see happening to your film, or where you're taking it in the next, say, 12 months?
I think I've always been keen for the film to be used as a bit of a tool, so as well as screenings, you know, for it to have that impact and be used almost to give, it's like you're almost giving the film up to the world and letting it be used in educational settings. People have been in touch about that already, and maybe even like prisons, and there's kind of lots of different people getting in touch about different options and where it could be used. So I'm quite keen for it to be, to have that educational life as well as obviously screenings and the kind of the more traditional side of making a film, and wanting people to see it just on a sort of, well, you've made something, so you definitely want an audience to see it. So there's kind of that dual approach. So we just need to work out how that's going to happen. We've been so focused on making the film and getting it ready for Sheffield that it's almost like the other, like you say, this is almost the halfway point, and the next half is like, what's that going to look like, and how are we going to work on that, and that'll hopefully be worked out soon, before it's too late. But there's also like, there's a bit of me that also wants kind of closure on it, and wants to sort of put a bit of a full stop on it, because it was so personal. I don't necessarily want to keep going over it and living it for too long. So I think my hope is that there'll be a period where it's like, we go for it and we try and get it out there, and then we set it up in a way that the world can use the film and it's available, but without me needing to necessarily be the one that's constantly going over it, so that I can move on to another topic. And once you make a film, you live with it forever. So I'm even, it's like you'll always be talking about it because it's your work. It's like I still talk about all the short films that I've made, but you hope that it becomes something you occasionally talk about, rather than, I think I'd go mad if I was talking about the film like in 5 years' time, if I was still, like going over it and over it. So it should have a sort of end point as well, where it's definitely like given up to the world, and they can use it and they can enjoy it and appreciate it.
But I also think as filmmakers, we should take a pause sometimes when you've done something and you've completed, you've edited it, and sort of revel in that, and sort of, before you step off. Maybe you are doing another project right now, but there's always this push to have 3 projects on at once, because of financing and how long they take. But I think it's an interesting time to sort of be like, look, I did this, and and the one thing I think it does really, really well, and probably just even within my own friends and people who have seen it so far who are at Sheffield, is it sparks conversations around things. And it made me think about how, like I said, other relationships that I maybe would have had, like I'm seen through their lens of, their life, and maybe reprocess that stuff. So I'll continue to think about it and look forward to seeing it again. When can people in the UK expect to see it, do you think? Do you know?
So I don't have any definite like answers on that, but I'm hoping that it'll be available in kind of some way for people in select cinemas, or maybe community screenings, or whatever it's going to be around the UK in the later half of this year. But that might spread into next year. I'm not quite sure. So I will kind of be putting all the screenings on the sort of silentmenfilm.com website, so people can check there. And probably on the Instagram as well. I've set up for it just to post where the screenings are and how they can see them. But we still have a lot of work to do in terms of organising that. So I don't have any definite screenings that I can say like it'll definitely screen here, but it looks like, based on the interest I'm getting, that we'll be able to organise more screenings in the second half of the year.
Yeah, and it's important to note you got a special mention which is a great honour at the Sheffield Doc Fest, and it was very, very popular as well. So congratulations on your world premiere, and thank you for taking the time to talk with me today.
Thanks very much. No, it's a pleasure to talk to you. Yeah, thanks.
So thank you again, Clara, for taking the Sheffield Doc Fest challenge with me. How have you are you looking forward to anything this summer, like film related? I mean, obviously the Edinburgh International Film Festival, we should hear probably by next month about the program. I'm very curious about what that's going to look like, but how about you?
I'm very much looking forward to that program, absolutely. And as much as I enjoy having the doc player and access to it, I am looking forward to stepping into the cinema very soon in Edinburgh, heading back in. And also, you know what, I'm gonna leave this on a really on a tasteful note and say that I'm really looking forward to seeing the remake of Twister.
Oh, that is a good one. Yeah, that is a good one. I remember the first one, and that really, exciting times, exciting blockbusters, aren't there? All right.
Well, time to be alive.
Yeah, and afraid. All right. Well, thank you for that, and we will see you all, or we'll talk to you all next month on the Cinetopia radio show and podcast. So see you then.
See you now. Bye.